Hi, hello, welcome. I'm Colin, and we're going to talk today for about an hour, although hopefully not an hour of me talking, about the craft of product management, which is very dear to my heart. I'll begin just by thanking GDS. Not everyone in the meeting is from GDS, but GDS are the people who've paid for me to be involved and helping them for the last few months, and so they're the people who've paid for this talk to happen, and so I begin by thanking them. Now, what I'm going to do today is seek to convince you that product management is probably the most important discipline for you to get right in product development in general. And I don't say that lightly. I trained in design at university. I spent most of the beginning of my career as a software engineer, and I've probably spent hundreds or thousands of hours in research sessions or poring over graphs. So I don't mean any disrespect to those other professions. But what I hope to show you in the next 30 minutes is that product management can be an incredibly powerful force multiplier on top of the efforts of all of those disciplines. And one of the reasons that product is so unbelievably important at this moment in time is that I think many of us would recognize that we are in the middle of an organizational shift in the way that our organizations work. And I've got a quick slide on this. Product management is a really strong bellwether for what kind of organization we are operating. And if a little bit like a canary in the mine, if you stuff a product manager into an organization and you find they thrive, there's a really good chance that organization is on the right of this slide. It's an outcome-oriented organization, and that person is going to grow and become ever more successful. If, on the other hand, you find them like a slightly sad bird, on the bottom of their cage, not without any vital signs, you might find that you are one of those organizations on the left. So product management is a really strong predictor of which one of those is you. Okay, onwards and upwards. The way that we're going to do this today is inspired by the great man himself, Bob Ross. So I don't know if any of you have watched any Bob Ross, but Bob he has a canvas behind him, and he sort of paints a landscape picture for you in the space of an hour, and it's all incredibly amazing to watch. And I've been watching a lot of Jeff Patton recently, who's kind of one of the great agile folks, and this was him at Mind the Product a couple of weeks ago, and he's been doing a sort of Bob Ross of agile thing where he kind of sketches as he goes. So we're going to be a bad Bob Ross cover band today, and we're going to do a bit of sketching as we go. Let's begin in Australia in 1955, when in Sydney someone had the wild idea to build an opera house, and in doing so kicked off what is probably the most famous story of our inability to predict the outcome of major projects. Construction began in 1959. They started building this beautiful thing, and they reckoned it would cost them about 7 million Australian dollars, and they thought it would take them around about 4 years. Now, many of us on the call are public servants, so would you like to see the Sydney Opera House 7 years later? Would you say it would be finished, do you think, or perhaps not? No, indeed, this is the Opera House in 1966, 7 years into construction, already almost 50% over time, and it doesn't look like somewhere that you would necessarily rock up to enjoy an opera in. In fact, it took them another 7 years longer than this. It was 1973 by the time the Queen came down, and they had a big ceremony, and they opened the Opera House, and it was an MVP. They had significantly de-scoped it from what they thought it would be like in 1959. And this is the really fun bit. It cost 104 million Australian dollars 15 times more than they expected, right? What a cost overrun. And of course, it took 3.5 times longer to build than they expected it to. And so this is probably like the poster child of poster children of projects going wrong and our inability to predict the universe. And it illustrates in a kind of funny way, but it does illustrate its very important dynamic, which is we just can't predict. We have an appallingly terrible, as a species, track record of predicting what will happen in the future. It's not just opera houses. If you look at meta studies done of complex projects, we find that 80 to 90% of them experience cost overruns, which routinely go into the 50% plus radius. The Channel Tunnel, for example, cost about 80% more money to build than people thought it would. And one of the really fun things about this is everybody always talks about the costs and the time and how it was, nobody knew how long it would take. But actually, if you look at the actual benefits realized, people are just as dumb about predicting those. Someone once asked, and this gives you a taste of the crazy things that people asked Deloitte to do. Someone asked Deloitte to value the Sydney Opera House in 2018, right? And this is the number they came up with, 6.2 billion. And what's an even more interesting number is the annual contribution of the Sydney Opera House to the economy of Australia, which was estimated at about 1.2 billion. So if you remember, it cost about $1 billion to build. So the Sydney Opera House repays every year the entire cost of building it. That's a pretty good investment. So not only do we have no idea how much things cost, we typically have no idea how valuable we'll find them in the long term. And it's not just limited to infrastructure projects either. Our inability to predict extends well beyond that. Contemporaneous accounts of World War II, for example, you would think you would find some people who saw that thing coming, and that indeed is how it's taught in history classes. But and I apologize for a Steve Jobs quote, but as Steve Jobs says, we can only connect the dots when we look backward, not when we look forward. This is one of my favorite quotes, and this does come from, this is used by Nassim Taleb in the Black Swan. But the quote is, "In all my experience, I've never been in any accident of any sort worth speaking about. I have never seen one vessel in distress in all my years at sea. I never saw a wreck and never been wrecked, nor was I ever in any predicament that threatened to end in disaster." This was said by E.G. Smith, who was the captain of the Titanic. Yes, fantastic, brilliant. What a truth seer he was. But of course, we use our previous experience to predict the future, and very often that doesn't work out well for us at all. Now, our own ability to predict shares something with what I think is probably the origin story of product management, or at least it's the one most of us read about. So in the defining tome of product, Marty Cagan's Inspired, he begins with a story about him at Hewlett-Packard, and he's in the latter end of the first dawn of artificial intelligence, and he's with a team of engineers, and they're building these cool features into their product, and finally it comes to release day, and everybody's very excited, and they ship it out to customers, and the only problem is nobody buys it. Right? Nobody buys it. Nobody buys it is probably the fundamental idea at the core of product management and the core of the way that we do product development in these days. And Marty calls it the inconvenient truth. And his sort of, if you go and read his blog, his technical definition of this inconvenient truth is that half of our ideas will fail. And even the ideas that do succeed will typically require 2 or more iterations in order to actually work for customers. And it's interesting, right? I don't know how many times I've recounted those words to executives and people I work with and colleagues, and it's very hard to get through to them exactly why this is true. People just kind of nod and look at me and go, "Yes, Ken, that sounds great. You're just being a bit lazy, though, aren't you? You're not really. You just don't want to pin your colours to the mast." And so I want to just take a moment before we get into the operational stuff about how product works to talk about why this problem is so difficult. And like all design problems, the product development problem is a problem of fit. So when we try and create a product or a feature, what we're essentially doing is trying to determine the thing, the design of the thing over here, that needs to fit the context that we've defined over on the right. And the challenge of product development, the reason why it's so bloody difficult, is that that fit, I argue at least, has multiple dimensions. And again, we can use Marty's definition of this stuff. So we know that for a product to succeed out there in the wilderness, it's got to be valuable for customers, right? That means that it delivers value to the people who use it and to the organization that builds it. And ideally, it means that customers would choose our product over the competitors in the environment. We know our product's got to be usable, right? So it doesn't matter how great it is if you can't find it and if you can't figure out how to use it. We know it's got to be feasible. We can actually build it. Our engineers are capable of creating this thing. And finally, and we're in the week of COP26, we know it's got to be viable. It's got to be in line with our values as makers, not just in line with our values, but our organization's values, and the things that our organization is going to get out of bed and go and care about and support. And we need all four of these, right? One is not enough. And in fact, we can play a little game. So let's say, I don't know, we come up with this great new feature idea that we've all got, and we're pretty confident that it's going to work, right? We think there's a good 2/3 chance that someone's going to find it valuable. We think, you know what, there's a good 2/3 chance that someone's going to find this thing usable, 2/3 that they're going to find it that we can actually build it, and 2/3 that our organization is going to get behind this, right? That's not bad odds, actually. It sounds pretty good. So let's play this game. We need a number higher than a three on each of these dice. Right? Oh, thank God. Every time I roll this, I'm like, it's going to come up and it's going to actually work. But no, we got a 2. We got a 2 on valuable. And the interesting thing about our results here, if I just look at what they actually are, is, okay, so we did well on viable, right? We came up with a good viable thing. We came up with something we could build. That's nice. It was just about usable. That's nice. But all of that is completely irrelevant because no customer would find it valuable. And so it is a loser loses all game that we're playing here. 3 out of 4 doesn't get you anywhere. And actually, I know this is a hilarious simplification of the universe, but your probability of getting a loss here is 80%. You have an 80% chance of losing, right? Every dice throw. And we can should we do another couple just to demonstrate? We're going to succeed, aren't we? Look, here we go. We shipped one. Second time. Oh well, we must be a lucky meeting today. But you have an 80% chance of failing. And that's before you even get into the nitty gritty of what actually is inside valuable, usable, these big high level words. Okay, we're going to get into some more kind of on the ground product development stuff that's a bit more content rich. But before we do that, I want to just mention one other factor that I think makes the challenge so difficult. One of my favorite quotes is this one from Zuck when he's like bitchily talking about Twitter, and he describes them as driving a clown car into a gold mine, which I just think is like the most amazing quote ever. And driving a clown car into a gold mine, as anyone who's worked in product development for a while, is a lot like how innovation feels. It kind of feels like it just sneaks up on you and happens. Most of the outcomes, most of the great innovations of our age, did not come from this, great process of central planning and sort of emerge like magic from central planning. Most innovation is the outcome of serendipity, or luck, in other words. If you look at email was someone's side project, ARPANET. No one ever asked anyone to build email. No one gave it to anyone as a task. No one even set an objective around it. Somebody just wrote it because they thought it was kind of a cool idea and they had the tools at hand to do it. The people who first detected the radio signal of the Big Bang, right, for several months prior, thought it was bird poop on the antenna, on the radar dish. They were convinced it was bird poop. This is how innovation arises. It arises out of bird poo. It doesn't arise out of central planning. And the other interesting thing about this whole problem space that we exist in of product development, if we look at our four-dimensional fit that we're looking at here, of course, that's vastly oversimplifying the problem, right? We're not actually trying to evaluate one thing. We're typically trying to evaluate which of many options is the optimal thing to do, right? We've got a bunch of ideas. Which of these things is the one that we want to do? And we tend to think that, you know, option A might be this difficult, option B might be this difficult, and option C might be that difficult. We have this idea in our head of this kind of fairly even distribution of challenge and benefit. The reality of the world, though, is that very often the optimal solution is many, many, many times better than its second best. And my favorite example of this one is the lifts. Has anyone heard the lift example? You know, you're in the hotel lobby. It's a big, tall building, and the hotel's getting a bunch of complaints. People coming and saying, you know, it's great, you know, I love the customer experience, but the lifts take too long. Like, it's taking me a long time to get up to my room. And so they look at all the options and they say, well, you know, we could put another lift in, or we could upgrade this lift. We could put in this, you know, great new computer system to you know, automate which lift to go where, until someone has the idea of installing a mirror outside the lifts. And as you know, if you've heard the story before, people stop complaining about having to wait too long. And this happens all the time in software. You know, the difference between something that you can do in 10 minutes with a library or have to write bespoke could easily be 100x. And so the world that we inhabit as product development people is exceptionally complicated and difficult, and it is hard. And I apologize for spending so long talking about just how hard it is. It probably sounds like me having a therapy session. But it is, I think, underappreciated. And I think unless you really internalize that, and unless the leaders in your organization internalize that, it's very difficult to make sense of anything else that I'm going to say, or really the value of product management at all. Oh, okay. Let's do, I'm running out of paper, which is not a good look. Let's do the actual model then. So how does a product development organization set itself up to be, in Taleb's words, a skeptical empiricism machine? How do we stop predicting and guessing and start actually using evidence to find our way to the right solution, right? Another way of looking at it is, how do we become a serendipity factory? How do we increase the likelihood that we will experience serendipitous innovations? And I'm going to kind of try and flesh out for you roughly what the product development ecosystem looks like, sort of melding the various thought leaders in our space into hopefully one little accessible diagram. Now, I know this talks about product management, not product development, but it's very, very difficult to explain product management without the broader context of product development. I mean, there is no such thing as a product manager outside of this context, really. It only exists in this particular world. So let's start. And we know, everybody knows where I'm going to start, right? The fundamental unit, the empowered product team, I'll just stick EPT there, right? That's the fundamental unit of product development. And this whole model, which some people call empowered product teams, or the product model, or product thinking, or people use different words, very like outcome oriented, because the big difference between what I'm about to describe and agile is, well, one of the many big differences is that in agile, the team generally does not have responsibility for results. They generally have responsibility for, as Jeff Patton would say, time, scope, and quality, but they don't have responsibility for business results, whereas an empowered product team does. What's inside an empowered product team if you're coming to this from never having worked in product management before? Well, typically you have a product manager, you typically have a tech lead, you might have a bunch of engineers, you might have a delivery manager, especially if you're in the public service where they're very common. You might have data analysts, you almost certainly have a product designer, you very likely have product researchers, you might have other roles, but those tend to be the core. And this cross-functional group of people is involved in two processes. Each empowered product team does only two things. And if we were in a live setting, you could shout out what they were, but I suspect many of you know already. The first thing that they do is they work out what the right thing to build is. And the process, the name we have for that process is discovery. And for the GDS people here or the others who have read the service manual, I don't really mean it in the way the service manual does. So the process of working out what the right thing to do is called discovery. And the second thing that they do is they ship stuff, and that we call delivery. And they engage in both of these processes continuously. So the buzzwords you'll hear are continuous delivery, which basically means we release code 5 times a day, and we have a lot of tech to help us do that, and continuous discovery, which means every week we're meeting with customers, we're always engaging around prototypes and trying to gather evidence of what we're doing is the right thing. I think the most helpful way, I mean, we could talk a lot about what happens inside those processes, but the most helpful way of defining their bounds is to talk about the inputs and the outputs. So what goes into discovery? Well, what goes into discovery basically is opportunities. You could call it ideas if you want to. They are very often jobs to be done, customer pain points, underserved needs that the customer has, but they can take many forms. There could be a new technology. There's lots of different ways of saying, here's a hypothesis for a thing that we could fix that might allow our product to deliver value. And the output of discovery, I don't hear many people talk about this, but the output of discovery, and back to our skeptical empiricism thing, it is 2 things. It is a specification, could be for a whole product, could be for a feature, a bit of a product, and it almost certainly takes the form of a prototype. You know, we used to write big, long requirements documents. We don't really do that anymore. It's almost certainly a prototype, because we've almost certainly been testing that prototype with users. So a specification. Specification isn't sufficient, though. That might still, that could well be still guesswork. So the other thing is evidence. And they're bound together. So we output a specification for a piece of work to do or a product to build, and evidence that that product is the right product to build, that it will actually tick those 4 boxes that we talked about earlier as the output of discovery. And that output is exactly the same thing that ends up down here. And you know, everyone will have heard of the backlog. I prefer to say delivery backlog. I would call that a discovery backlog. And the delivery backlog should really only consist of things that are well defined and that we have clear evidence that they're worth building, right? What happens if this process slows down and we stop working out what to build is that this starts to be populated with guesswork, right? Because we just dry up. So we're back to we're back to rolling the dice. So we can roll the dice if we want. That's perfectly valuable. And in fact, obviously, most startups are rolling the dice constantly. Sometimes you don't have the time. And then the output of delivery. Well, of course, it's the product. The product is the sum of all delivery. That's all it is. So those are our 2 fundamental processes. Cool. Okay. There's 2 other things I think that are important to understand about a product team before we move on. There are really 2 feedback loops. So how does the product team engage with this wider ecosystem, the organization around it and customers? Well, there are 2 feedback loops at the heart of every product development team that's high functioning. The first and probably the most important is the feedback loop with customers. So a high-functioning product team is constantly engaging directly with customers because, of course, they are. Because if they weren't, how would they be generating any evidence that the things that they're doing would work? And so, roughly speaking, the inputs and outputs of this feedback loop are the team are presenting experiments, right? Again, this is basically just applied scientific method. We're presenting experiments to the customer, and what we get back, the joys that we get back from those experiments are evidence. So an experiment could be an A/B test, or more likely it's going to be some qual or whatever. It really depends what stage the product is in. But experiments and evidence is always common. But this is all cool, right? This is cool. It's very user focused, right? And actually, if this was a startup that we were drawing a picture of, we're done. You know, there isn't anything else, right? You know, the PM is probably the CEO. Everybody's working together. We're working directly for customers. And in terms of our strategy or goal or vision or whatever, to be honest, we don't give a monkeys about any of it. We just want to find product market fit. All we care about is this and you know, building out this product. But most of us don't exist in a startup environment. Most of us exist in a multi-team situation. And at that point, we need a way of ensuring that our teams are aligned and moving in the same direction. And so we have another feedback loop up here. And this is the feedback loop with leadership. So if you're the VP product or the chief exec or director of your bit of the universe, this is where you might function. And the two the two kind of inputs and outputs that are important here are goals. So what is, for example, how does the team understand which opportunities to take into discovery? What's the thinking framework that guides that, right? So the answer to that question is here. It depends what the goal is. And so the leadership team provide goals. It isn't a one-way thing though. You're negotiating what the correct goal for the moment in time is. And what the leadership team will bring to that, hopefully, is an understanding of what the organization is trying to achieve. And what the product team will bring to that is an understanding of what their customers want, how the product works, what's actually feasible. And so that conversation together, you can find a good set of goals that then lets you drive what goes into discovery. And what do teams give back to leadership? And this is back to why it's called outcome-oriented. Results is what they give. They don't give software back. They give results back, right? If your team is being asked to, or if any team is being asked primarily to deliver working software, then it is just a code as a service team, right? And results is still being owned up here by leadership. So that is incompatible with this model, and it's incompatible with product management. You can have product ownership, that's fine, in the agile definition, but you don't really have empowered product teams. Cool. How are we doing? 2:30. So that is, in a nutshell, what an empowered product team looks like. It all looks really simple, doesn't it? I should continually say there is no one way. I've never seen a team that operates exactly like this. But it's a nice mythical idea for us to hold in our heads while we think about the job of the PM. Cool. So I'm going to spend probably the last 5 minutes or so talking about the product role specifically. I think now that we've imbibed the sort of fundamental fallibility of everything and how humble we need to be, and we've talked about what it might look like to create a team that is skeptically empirical and trying to optimize for serendipity. Now we can talk about the product role specifically within that. And I think the challenge here is that most of the roles in this team, if you look at the technical roles, tech lead and engineer, if you got rid of those, it's pretty clear what would happen. You'd have way less technology, you'd have less code, less movement. If you got rid of your researcher, you would find that the throughput of research reduced significantly. If you got rid of your designer, you'd find that your design went to shit. So, like, what happens when you get rid of the product person? Like, what's this person doing here? I think the answer to that, there's a couple of answers. The first thing that would happen if you removed a product manager from the empowered product team is you would find that suddenly collaboration within the team would be extremely difficult. You would find the quality of conversations would reduce significantly. I mean, collaboration is basically just conversations. And what undergirds every conversation is some shared mental model about how the product works and about what good looks like. So if we dive over to this slide, I have a nice slide on this. Many of you will have seen this little cartoon before, and I love it. Communication between us as human beings is a pretty inexact science, and we're all being very social and polite with one another the whole time. And as a result, it can be very easy for quite fundamental disagreements about how the system works that we're changing, or what direction we want to change it in, to lurk for months or years. I mean, I many times have worked with a colleague for a couple of years before, you know, one comment at the pub after a couple of pints to realize, oh my goodness, we literally never agreed what we thought. You know, I thought we shared this whole mental model. We don't. So the product role's absence will immediately make collaboration on the team much weaker, not because they facilitate collaboration necessarily in the way that a delivery manager might do through retrospectives and that kind of thing, but because they create the sort of intellectual foundation for people to talk to each other, right? The other thing that would fall apart quite quickly is I'm sort of struggling for a good word for this because I don't love alignment. But if you think about the team's presence in the wider organization, what would probably happen were you to take the product manager out is the team might still be moving quickly. They might even still be shipping stuff that customers like. I mean, remember, you've got high quality product designers in there ideally, so it's going to be usable. Everyone's smart. It's going to be viable. It's going to be valuable. You know, like, frankly, most product teams are perfectly capable of shipping great product without a PM. But it's about the directionality of that shipping. Is it connected to the organization's goals, and is it advancing the wider value system? And the interesting thing about this is it's not a linear process. The organizational goals are not static or stable. You know, as leadership rolls through, you will find that they change. As the market changes, you will find that they change. And so just in the same way, I always describe it to engineers like maintaining an open source repository, right? It's like there's a constant work to do in continually realigning what the team is doing with what the organization is doing. As Reed Hastings always says, it's about leading with context, not with control. Helping everyone understand that core context, creating shared understanding and alignment. Product managers making decisions is an anti-pattern, right? It is okay to sometimes make decisions. There are often decisions like market positioning that no one else is going to take. That's fine. But far too many product managers are making product design decisions or even technology decisions, you know, trying to work out what to buy and build. This is not the product job. The product job is to create a shared understanding such that those decisions are automatic when the expert actually comes to make them, right? They're used just in time. In the kind of, so what customers' needs and price, this is the kind of classic Michael Porter definition of strategy. So where you're positioning the product, no one else can do that if the PM doesn't. The value system around the product. So how does the product deliver value? That might be fiscal value. It might be societal value. It might even be organizational value. How does it improve the brand of my organization? Or it might have an indirect marketing benefit for another product or drive a funnel of another product. And it's not just about making money. What's the value system around the product? I already talked about syncing up with the leadership team and leading that leadership feedback cycle. But this is really the core of the job. The other bit, which is a bit more contentious, is about the work itself. Now, my view, and it's not everyone's view, I should put that in, but it's not everyone's view, but my view is, after doing product for a long time, I'm torn between, on the one hand, most of the actual activities that a team undertakes are not done by the product manager. Like, as the PM, you're not responsible for the quality of product design, clearly. You're not responsible for how good the interviews are. You're not responsible for the code. So how are you somehow responsible for all of it? It's kind of weird. But in a very real sense, you are. You are because you've steered the ship in the first place. You've set the goals that have, or led the setting of the goals that have created that, made that work happen. And to be honest, if you go and talk to any of the leadership team or the executive team, and if they think that your team is doing the wrong work, they will find you accountable. So it slightly doesn't matter how much you walk around going, product management is a team sport. You know, we're all in this together. Yeah, sorry, you're accountable. You just are. It's kind of unavoidable. And lastly, you've all heard of the selfish gene. I think there's something to understand here is that no one else other than the product manager, right? No other voice in the organization speaks purely for the product. Everybody else is in some horizontal. They approach things with their craft front of mind, right? They've been taught a set of skills, the PM is not a purely functional role. It doesn't come at things. Some people say its function is about decision making. That's an okay way of thinking about it, but we're not like professional logicians or anything. One of the big things we bring to the table is that we don't care about anything other than the product. We are the selfish product. We are the people that go to the meeting and are like, do not take our people away. In fact, give us more people, right? We want more people for our thing. We are the people that are like, you can't put me in optimization mode. I think there's great headroom in this product, right? I'm going to go and innovate. And because you're the most outward facing role, you're also the one that's going to help your team kind of navigate this horrible organizational jungle that we all live in, because society is complex, and human beings are social and weird and interesting. So that's what I think the core of the product job is. It's taken me a long time to arrive at that definition. I'm sure you've got your own, and it's probably equally valid. So there is definitely no one path here. I'll just finish by saying, sometimes people ask me what I look for or what I hire, or maybe some of the people on the call are trying to get into product management. What are the attributes? And I think I look for three things. The biggest one, and it comes back to what we talked about at the start of this call, the biggest one is humility with a preparedness to take risk. So the wonderful thing about nobody knowing what the right thing to do is nobody knows what the right thing to do is. That means it's okay to take risks. It's okay to try things. You don't just have to get really small-minded and incremental. So you have to be a bit of a risk taker, but you also have to be humble. I look for systems thinkers, people who can think of how everything connects together, because it is a cohesion role. It's not about one individual discipline. And finally, I look for, I always say, merchants of ideas. If the job is to lead with context, not control, if the job is to direct people without ever telling them what to do, then to do that job, you need to be pretty good with ideas, and you need to be pretty good at communicating them. A lot of the best PMs I've worked with, they've used GIFs, they Slack emojis, laptop stickers, anything they can to sort of evangelize and get out their message about what they think the right thing to do is, how to herd the cats in the direction that they think is right. Great. Cool. Well, look, thank you so much for listening to me. That was an awful lot of talking for the last 40 minutes. I will shut up now and have a look in the chat and Q&A, and let's see if we can use the last sort of 90 minutes for discussion. But thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening.